I'm going to ask a question, and I know it's rhetorical. Don't want you to answer, just think on these things. You ever had a problem and it hasn't been resolved real quickly? And all you can do is ask, how long is this going to go on? Thank you. How long is this going to go on? I think that might have been Freudian. Something that's just not resolved, something that won't go away, something that you'd like to have happen. You're waiting and just keep saying, how long? Now I'm going to ask you, have you ever been in that position? How long? I think we spend a lot more time in that state. If you take your problems collectively over your lifetime, I think you spend a lot more time in that state, asking yourself, how long is this going to be like this? I think about this church. And there are times when I just sit back and I think, God, how long will we be like this? And being like this, by the way, isn't bad. Forgive me for the analogy, but if you've ever planted a garden or you've planted fruit trees or anything that can grow, you know that at some point you expect a harvest. You expect something to come. Now, in the natural, if you plant something and it doesn't grow, there might be something wrong with what you planted. Maybe it's not getting enough nutrients, not getting enough water, not getting enough sun, whatever it is. But the point is, at some point, you're going to look at what's going on and say, there's a problem here. I've looked at this work and said to myself, at times, in impatient desire. I'm not a fruit inspector, but I am someone who does love to grow, and I garden, and I do a lot of that. So the expectancy, it's an anticipation. That's a better word. It's an anticipation to even see the first bud, the first tender something that's coming up, the first tender shoot. But there is a lot longer period for this church where I've said, how long? Than there has been for at least some of the smallest tender shoots to come up. So I thought I would look in the book, because that's where I always find my answers. Look in the book, find my answers in the book. And strangely enough, my quest for this took me to Psalm 13. It's a very short psalm. It's only 6 verses long. How long wilt thou forget me, O Lord? Forever? How long wilt thou hide thy face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? How long shall mine enemy be exalted over me? That's a lot of how longs in just 2 verses. If you read the header underneath, it says, to the chief musician, a psalm of David. You know, David's not the only person who used this language of anxiety or impatience. Habakkuk did the same thing. The opening verse, chapter and verse of Habakkuk, how long, O Lord? In fact, there are a lot of God's people that ask the question, how long? Which really, if you're going to read the Bible, really humanizes. It really makes us know we are not that different In fact, we're very much the same. Considering if this is indeed, and it is indeed, a Psalm of David, think of this, as I called it, the language of anxiety. How long wilt thou forget me, O Lord? He thinks he is shut out from God. Now, I'm going to stop right there for a second and say divine forgetfulness is never divine forgetfulness. It's not mindlessness. I think many times God lets us be in the how long state to let us think on these things. How many times have you been in a problem where you're asking the question, how long? And you spend more time lamenting over the problem or the thing you're waiting on or the tumult of your mind versus the time you ought to spend just talking with God about all the things He's already done for you. This is what happens when we get sucked into something and we start asking how long. I can't take this anymore. The pain of waiting and impatience is killing me. It probably is too. But I want you to listen to his language. How long will you forget me? Forever? Now, considering the life of David that we have recorded in this book, and we don't have every single day of his life, but maybe one day for him felt like a lifetime, felt like forever. Maybe it was a month, who knows, could have been a year, but it couldn't have been that much longer. And he says, you're going to forget me. How long? Forever? You know, you engage in a little bit of exaggeration, maybe like instead of saying I cried a few tears, I cried a whole bucket. I cried me a river. God, can't you see the river I've cried? You know, sometimes we engage in that. This is a very strong, how long wilt thou forget me, O Lord? Forever? How long wilt thou hide thy face from me? The want of his presence. I've used this analogy many times of the parent that disciplines the child. Well, now I don't listen, I don't know. This is dated information now because I don't know what parents do to children. What's lawful and what's not. But when I was a child and I was disciplined, you know, you get disciplined and you get put in your room and you suddenly think you're alone in the room and no one can hear you, so you're crying your guts out and all the tears are flowing until, you know, but your parents in the next room. But you think while you're crying and maybe you're sitting in the dark, you're really alone. No one can hear you. Those loud cries of the child, you know, the child thinks no one can hear me. Or maybe I'll cry a little bit louder so they will hear me. Trust me, even the faintest cry of the child is heard by the parent. You and I both know what that's like. You hear just the faintest cry. So it's kind of interesting that this, how long will thou hide thy face from me? It's almost like this language, I've called it, of anxiety. The cry of a person under pressure and affliction to think that God cannot see and is not there and is not responding and will not respond. And I mentioned somebody yesterday, I mentioned an individual. It's very generic about the mentioning of this individual. But I'm sure that there are many just like this individual who think because God did not do or act upon the fleece that they put out, that somehow God isn't doing and won't do. And I've said many times, God, I think even with this work, will sit back and wait. And when I have stopped pacing the room in my impatience, or maybe asking the questions in disfaith or in doubt, you know, you want something, you ask of God, you ask it in faith, and I'm saying carefully, there are many people who think they're doing something in faith and they think this must be according to God's will. How do you know that if the first act is not acting in faith and following the things that you know God has already revealed surely from His Word. So here, the question is, how long will you hide your face from me? And I don't think I've ever felt like God has hidden His face. I've oftentimes over the years, I've said sometimes in expressions of sadness or disgust, some people's lack of trust, to trust God, to take God at His word. And I'm not saying that like I'm condemning somebody. I'm talking about people who just didn't have the faith at all to stick it out, just to stay by the stuff. I've probably said, God, have you removed your hand? You ever said something like that? That's like in the Old Testament when David said, don't, or in the New Testament, Paul said, don't take your spirit away from me. Both actually said it in a different way. It's just like that. And because of a sensitive soul, sensitivity towards God, you're constantly thinking about, have I done something to offend? Have I done something that would be such an insult to God? And I want you to reflect on who's writing this. I'm David, a man after God's own heart, but David who also sinned terribly, not just the sin of being with Bathsheba, but all that accompanied with it. And we know about a few other things that are recorded for us in his life, and yet he says, how long wilt thou hide thy face from me? And he's recorded as a man who, we'll call him in close proximity to God, asking the question. So how much more someone like me or like you might be apt to ask that question. Here's the next one. How long shall I take counsel in my soul? How long should I be tossed and perplexed inside, having sorrow in my heart daily? How long should I be in this state? You ever suffered a heartache? Like, could be husband or wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, could be your children, could be your parents. You ever suffer that? I'm talking about that, what goes on in the heart, where it's just a burden for you. Every day is a grind about that individual. You ever had that? I know you have, because I have too. How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? I guess that's a good question. Unless you already know what the answer is. If you let these things consume you, sorrow of heart especially, it'll take up every thought and every energy unit of your day. I've been grieved over my lifetime, over especially, and I say specifically as a Christian, over people that I've loved in the Lord. I've loved them for Christ's sake. And they have not been able to see or respond to that. And it's a heartbreak. Because I think about those individuals and I think if they only knew whatever time they have, if they get 30, 40, 50 years, whatever it is that they have left, it's still short in comparison to eternity. And loving somebody in the Lord is caring about their eternal destiny, where they're going. So yeah, I've had heartaches of different kinds, and sometimes these can consume you. And talk about these things on a daily basis and on and on and on, or you can get a little bit more wise and say, Lord, I've grieved about this long enough. This individual, I'm placing this individual on the altar with you. After all, you said from your book, all souls are mine, this one belongs to you. You want it with you in glory. You work on it. I'm done. I'm spent. I shouldn't say that because I've been accused of trying too hard and not giving up. I think I have shown, even in times where I've come to sit down, I've kept going to try and reach people who I think are still watching, knowing that there just may be a little bit of God's Spirit left in that individual to bear witness, Spirit bearing witness to Spirit, of the motivation of that call, which could never be vested in me personally, because personally I'd say, enough. But how long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? And here's the last one. How long shall mine enemy be exalted over me? And I'm sure here probably this has to be Saul, the reference here. I don't know. I do not think that he would be referencing his son, so I'm going to say it should be Saul here, but who knows? We could put that in the category for us who are continually attacked by the devil, to say, how long shall mine enemy have this ability to gloat of watching me fall and watching me fall down and watching me fall down over and over and over again. You might put it like that. How long? So these repetition of how long, and then begins the language of intercession. So we had the language of anxiety. Now begins the language of intercession that begins in verse 3. Consider and hear me, O Lord my God, lighten mine eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Let me stop there. This is kind of a difficult passage to translate properly. But as I said, it's language of intercession or supplication. Consider and hear me, O Lord my God, lighten mine eyes. Because it's written such a way from the Hebrew, we might do well to consider two different meanings on the lighten mine eyes. One of them is because David has chronicled his how long and his sorrow. If you've ever been consumed with something, you know what that does to your eyes? Makes them feel heavy. You can barely keep them open. You know what I'm talking about? I know you know what I'm talking about. You can barely, this happens to me. I can barely keep my eyes open when I'm under what I think is usually some type of emotional attack. Usually it's from sorrow or grief. I'll get heavy eyes. So the way this reads in the Hebrew could be understood as lighten my eyes as in from his sorrow, or essentially put your light in me. It's hard to understand because of the nature of Hebrew's ambiguous words. And then this lest I sleep the sleep of death is equally difficult. The translators did what they could here, but it's a hard sell, folks. You can notice the sleep of is italicized, the second one. It just says lest I sleep, and the Hebrew reads of the death. So however you want to interpret that, whether his sorrow is killing him, literally or figuratively. But before it's too late, put your light in my eyes or remove the sorrow. That's not a bad prayer to ask when you need to ask directly. And I've said that when you pray directly. But listen to what goes on next here. Lest mine enemy say, I have prevailed against him. In other words, God, can you figure out how to pick me up and dust me off a little bit here so that the gloat fest can stop? And most of the time we want to get up and we want to brush ourselves off and make sure nobody saw. There's no harm in asking God, lift me up, Lord, I can't stand. Lift me up, help me up. Lest the enemy says, this isn't part of his, or what a fine job is happening over here with this one. You know, you can read this and you can read it and you can read it, but then it becomes almost a reality. And those that trouble me rejoice when I am moved. I read that earlier and I went, yeah. Like, Lord, come on, give me a break. I'm tired of a lot of those people thinking all of a sudden when trouble hits, You know, I know how people are. I know the nature of people. There's enough of you that are filled with the Spirit of God that when I share something that's grief or sorrowful news of something, when one hurts, the whole body hurts. But there are some that are outside the body. They're those what I call the barnacles on the boat. Their whole MO is to hold on and look like they're doing something, but all they do is suck. I'm talking about the barnacles. Don't think I've gotten so religious on you that I can't get a few things in there. And those that trouble me rejoice when I am moved. And watch this move from the language of anxiety to the language of intercession to what I call the language of confession or certainty. But I have trusted in thy mercy. My heart shall rejoice in thy salvation. I will sing unto the Lord because he hath dealt bountifully with me. That's just kind of interesting. I kind of went through this and I thought, if I could remember this psalm when I'm lamenting, how long? And when I'm in that state of mind, move through the progress of this psalm from anxiety to intercession to the certainty or confession of faith. But I have trusted in thy mercy. My heart shall rejoice in thy salvation. I will sing unto the Lord because he hath dealt bountifully with me. This reminds me of another psalm, Psalm 116:7, that says, return unto thy rest, O my soul, for the Lord hath dealt bountifully with thee. So it's not just a one-time thing to say. You can take comfort. The secret of the Lord is with them that fear him. I love that. This moves from, I think I'm shut out. I've kind of chronicled the steps here. I think I'm shut out. God is not listening. The sorrow and bewildered temperament, almost a collapse under pressure that moves into a different realm, that of trust. Trust leads to prayer. Prayer leads to that petition that ultimately brings the certainty of God's deliverance. There's this beautiful progression through this short psalm, and I thought, the next time I get into that state, I'm going to try and remember Psalm 13 and something so simple. I write these, what I've called headers. Your Bible has a header. If you have a Bible like mine, Psalm 13 is labeled a prayer for help. And that may be so. I don't know who made these headers up, but I like the way I sometimes will divide a psalm, and I'll write it in my Bible so that when I'm flipping through and I'm looking for something, I can find easily what the meat of something is I'm looking for. The language of anxiety, the language of intercession, the language of confession, which helps me to think Psalm 13 when I'm staying too long somewhere. I know there's plenty of places you can go to in the book that are familiar to you. Those nitro pill places, Psalm 37, and there are plenty of other places, Psalm 56 and Psalm 57, what time I'm afraid I will trust in the Lord. There are all those passages, but this one has a natural progression. It's not too long, and it takes me through David's mindset, which I'm really glad this psalm doesn't have 20 or 40 verses to it, just 6, the number of a man, reminding me that this is just human nature to get into this state. And the hope that is nestled in between these lines says to me it's okay at times for me to say, how long? Like David, like Habakkuk, like others. But come to my senses a little quicker and begin the language of intercession that will bring on that language that says, Lord, I know you're listening. I took a temporary stupid pill in saying, will you forget me forever? I know you care about me, and I know I matter to you. I'm going to do what Psalm 37 or 1 Peter tells me to do, which is cast my cares upon you, because I know it matters to you. And hopefully I'll get to it a little quicker next time, not so much lament, a little bit more intercession, and maybe hopefully towards the end and quicker, I'll come to the language of certainty that allows me to praise and worship your name as faithful and true, marvelous, deliverer, redeemer, all the things that I know you are. I couldn't forget that. Oh, I just did for a second, and I'm right back where I started, Psalm 13, language of anxiety, language of intercession, language of confession. Now, I don't know where you are tonight. I know for me, this was my salve for the day. It'll probably be the place I camp out for the week. Hope you'll reflect on it, meditate on it. Maybe it'll be of benefit to you at some point. I know it sure has helped me. Get on the telephone.
Come into this house, magnify the Lord, lift up holy hands, our hearts in one accord, worship and